Hello, welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly program where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. As a reminder, the thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any Grand Lodge statements or positions. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level. To interact with us, as always, we'd love to see you live every Thursday night at 9:30 Eastern over on Facebook land and on YouTube. So if you want to chat with us while we have the show or chat with others, love to see you over there. Let's see, you know me. My name is John Ruark, and I'm an esotericist. And you'll find out what that means a little bit later on. Let's head over to Jason Richards for his introduction.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Jason Richards, past master of Vacation Lodge number 16 in Clifton, Virginia, member of the Colonial Lodge number 1821 in Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Next up, Robert Johnson. Hey, how's it going?
Hello, everybody. Live from Joe's office. Robert Johnson here, past master, sitting secretary at 1183 Space Novum Lodge in Libertyville, Illinois, and full-blown occultist.
Nice. Speaking of occultists, Joe Martinez, how are you doing today?
Hello, this is Joe Martinez, cameo guest star here on the Masonic Roundtable. I'm definitely an esotericist, and I am senior warden of Manasseh 182 in Virginia. I'm also a member of Ezekiel Bates Lodge in Attleboro, Mass, and a bunch of other things. So yeah, thank you for having me tonight.
Sweet. So, before we get into
I guess I should have said I dabble in esoterics.
Dabble. There you go.
I dip a toe in every now and then.
So let's see.
Slip to toe to jacuzzi.
Let's see. Also, as always, want to.
It's only when Christianity particularly upsets me.
Hey, we can talk about that. That'll be fun. I want to thank the patrons who've been supporting the show, who've been helping us over the years. We really do appreciate it. So if you want to help support the future of Masonic education, head over to patreon.com/the Masonic Roundtable. And we'd love to see you in our little Facebook group. It's been bumping lately. We've had a lot of good book recommendations, a lot of good chatter back and forth. Love to see you over there. You can talk to us offline more than once a week. So let's see. Tonight's topic is called the Esoteric Apologist. This is something that... If you've watched the show for any length of time, you know we all kind of dabble in it in some way, shape, or form. But now we're really going to kind of put all the cards out on the table and talk a little bit about what does it mean to basically come out as an esotericist in Freemasonry, right? I mean, it's June, it's Pride Month, and not to usurp a national month, but to say that. There is, and as I was preparing for the show, I was thinking a little bit about like how it depends on who you talk to in lodge if you really want to start going down the rabbit hole on some really weird things, because there are those who would feel uncomfortable or just not be into that, and so we'll talk a little bit about what that means, how to find others of like mind, and really just not deny our support for the deeper aspects of Freemasonry. So, just to kind of set the stage, and the guys haven't been prepped for this, so I'm going to let you go right off the top of your head, and I want each one of you to define what are the esoteric aspects of Freemasonry, like, or not particularly by the ritual, but I'm just saying, what is esotericism? I'll put it that way. What would you define as what is esoteric in this context? Jason, define esoteric.
Esoteric is knowledge that is kept for a select few. It is a kind of a partner word to occult, which means hidden. And so esoteric knowledge is a knowledge that is something that is reserved for a niche, small sliver of the population. And so when it comes to Freemasonry, specifically with esoterics, I like to say that the initiatic experience of Freemasonry is the gateway to esoteric knowledge, because in some ways esotericism and esoteric ideas can be a bit ineffable. The idea that you have a deeply profound experience, but you can't necessarily put it into words. That's something that, you know, has a life-changing effect on you, but you can't necessarily translate that into words or pass that on to other folks. And I kind of see the initiatic experience of Freemasonry as that ineffable esoteric, you know, brotherly experience.
Joe, would you agree, disagree? How would you define esoteric?
Well, I think Jason's definition is spot on, right? The dictionary definition of the word esoteric means understood by a select few or a small group, right? So it's knowledge that is constrained to a select group of people, and that's really all it is. And you know, it's the word's been conflated, especially in Freemasonry, to mean so many other things. You know, it bleeds into the word occult, and the word occult, you know, to Jason's point, is also misused a lot of times. But you know, we'll do occult another night. But you know, in terms of what is, you know, one thing that is esoteric, you know, and I'm really sorry to burst the bubble for people, but everything about a lodge's meeting, getting together for a meeting, is esoteric. Every single aspect of a lodge meeting has some esoteric meaning to it, whether you think so or not. And I'm sure we'll delve into those.
Just by the literal definition, right? That it is reserved for a select few, right?
Just like, you know, nobody seems to be able to properly cook green beans.
It's reserved for only a select few.
Yes.
All right, RJ, what's your definition of esoteric?
Yeah, same thing, right? A select few is the dictionary definition. However, when we look at things like esoteric, just as an art within Freemasonry, you know, it really means that it's an internal process. So if you look at like exoteric, outward, esoteric, and the reason why it can't be shared with somebody isn't so much a lesson to be taught like a mathematics and arithmetic lesson. As Jason pointed out, these are individual experiences, and what Freemasonry maintains today kind of in a weird way validates the idea of esoteric when they say Freemasonry is a group of men who have a shared experience. So in that shared experience is an esoteric thing. It's an experience. So every experience is esoteric, right? You go on a roller coaster for the first time, and that experience is esoteric. Now, no, we're not necessarily talking about like that kind of experience, right? But in Freemasonry, it's also a deeply philosophical, a deeply, I don't want to say religious, but I'm going to say religious, a deeply religious organization, and that it promotes the religion or the religious values of whatever it is the member chooses to use. So within all of that context lies this, you know, rain cloud to some of this idea of esoteric, which, as Joe pointed out, is ingrained in every single element of the Masonic experience. But and we'll get into this, but I mean, it's just it's fantastic at any rate that anybody in any position of power within Freemasonry, the regular organization that is, has anything negative to say about the esoteric. And in fact, even the word esoteric in different jurisdictions means quite a bit different things. You know, if you were to say esoteric masonry here in Illinois, they understand that to mean more philosophical, more spiritual type practices. If you say that, perhaps in some jurisdictions, they'll think that you're specifically talking about the ritual. As it's taught, they call that the esoteric work sometimes. And that's just, I don't know if you want to call that a misnomer, right? Like, I don't know if that's the right word for it, Jason.
Joe's giving the up and down. Yeah, it's a misnomer.
It's just, it's totally bizarre to conflate it into something that it isn't. And maybe that was done in order to normalize the word. You know, in like 2012 or 2013, right? New Zealand banned the term esoteric.
Right.
So it's a very it's a dividing line for a lot of folks, for sure.
Yeah, and I'll go on to say, other than the like literal definition, which we've covered, specifically as I see it in diving deep into the philosophies of Freemasonry, esoteric to me is looking at the influences of the ritual and the religious and biblical context of those that are not easily found by a surface reading or a literal reading of the ritual. Right, so there are things, and I'll go into this too later on, where there are things that are explicitly put in the ritual that once you find them, it's not an accident, right? There may not be provable ways. I mean, we do have a lot of talk. We've talked about Desaguliers and his influence. We've talked a lot about the Royal Society and its influence. But as you look at some of the meaning behind the ritual and some of the symbols that we use, there are some things that are not an accident. And so I think we'll all agree, this whole panel will agree, that the old adage of there are no secrets in Freemasonry is 100% entirely false. And anyone who's ever said that to you doesn't know what they're talking about. Agree or disagree?
I totally agree. And I think you and I hit a point on this in the past. This, just when you started to say that, like, my blood pressure started going up. I mean, I wrote an article several years ago called "The Great Half-Truth of Masonry," which was really about how people said, there's no secrets in Masonry and there's no like power groups in Masonry or whatever. And that's a great half-truth. There are, right? They're not nefarious groups, right? But they are groups of people who practice the arts, whatever you want to call it, the royal art of Masonry, in a way that, if you want to call it conjuring, if you want to call it the Masonic term, invoking, I mean, people practice the spirits. I mean, if you think what any part of this is weird, you can find the same secrets, quote unquote, the same types of things that people might consider uncomfortable notions within the fraternity in many world religions. I've been to Catholic Mass. Okay, I grew up in that church. It can get weird, and so I would just make that same correlation. Anybody who says that some of this esoteric stuff is a little too weird, I mean, there's a lot of weird stuff in the world that a lot of people believe, so
Not at all.
Don't get me started.
Well,
I mean, that's like OTO kind of stuff right there.
Joe, you're going to say, yeah.
Yeah, to Robert's point, I mean, he kind of hit it on the head there, and I think we do a bad job as an organization of highlighting this. But just to touch on something you said, John, where I went through, when I went to college the first time, when I was at the age that I was supposed to go to college, I joined a fraternity. I did the college frat thing and I did the initiation. There is worlds of difference between joining a college fraternity and joining Freemasonry. You know what I mean? But
unless
just to bring it back,
your college fraternity is Phi Mu Alpha, in which case they've got the best initiation ceremony I've ever seen anywhere.
Is that the jazz band fraternity that you were talking about? Yeah.
That's a men's music fraternity. It's amazing.
Jazz band. All right.
The
but to that point, just going back to what Jason said, the people who wrote our ritual hundreds of years ago would not have put all the effort and forethought and parables essentially into our ritual if it didn't have some other purpose than to just, as with most college fraternities, not all, Jason, shuffle you through to go through some sort of hazing ritual, and then you're a member, you get to wear the jacket.
Yeah, Robert, so, what's the Wilmshurst quote? Because I know it's on like every business card of your life.
Yeah, it's with some bookmarks made. We use the quote. It says, paraphrasing, I might be a little bit wrong. It says something like, "It is absurd to think that a vast institution like Freemasonry exists merely to teach grown men the allegorical meanings of some working tools." Right? Like, that's exactly it. There's just no friggin' way. I mean, Joe and I were talking in the car this morning, and he said, "What did you say?" Well, first you mentioned the idea of invoking, but the other thing you had mentioned was, what exactly are you invoking? Just to read the minutes, right? Like.
So yeah, I mean, I literally, so we were going through, prepping for tonight, and what I've always harped on to people is every single part of lodge ritual is esoteric, right? So it's not just junk to memorize, and that's why I lose my mind when I see people. I sit in the West this year, so I get to see the whole lodge, and it blows my mind to see people during the opening ritual staring at their phone or jaw-jacking with their buddies and laughing and hoo-hawing,
Right.
And I'm like, there is absolutely no reason for that, because if you shut up for a minute and paid attention, you would see that every single thing we do is deliberate, it has a purpose, and it has a meaning more so than the surface one that we portray, right?
Yeah, I mean, and just to get right to the point on that, without revealing any secrets of the ritual, most philosophic rituals, like throughout the world, usually, especially when they're like cleansing a space, will have a purging. They'll have an invocation, and they'll also have there was a third thing too, right? So basically, you're clearing out the impurities from a space, which is what we do when we tile, and get rid of people who aren't Master Masons or aren't at the level of the lodge that we're opening at. We'll invoke the blessing of deity at every meeting, right? And so we are, basically consecrating that space, if even for a temporal period of time. So, I mean, that alone.
And there's a certain part of the ritual that, includes an actual consecration,
right,
of the space, turning it into a sacred space.
To that third point that you were starting to talk about is basically after you do the cleansing part, then you're basically sealing that space.
Sealing, that's the one. Thank you. That's it.
And we do that when the things that happen around the Great Lights, and they happen on an altar, right? Not a table or a bookshelf. They happen on an altar. But Robert and I were touching on the invocation part for a hot minute in the car, and we actually had an interesting conversation because we started to talk about, well, why do we call it an invocation and why is it not a prayer? Because it's not only a prayer, because it's doing something for a very, very specific purpose, right?
Good call.
When you invoke or when you're performing an invocation, the actual purpose of it is to ask someone, normally we ask that supreme being or that higher power, for assistance in the work that we're about to perform. And that's where I made that really pithy comment about, well, do you really think we need to invoke the blessing of deity to read the minutes and to argue about the car wash that's happening next week? I'm like, no, that's not its purpose.
Yeah, we've gone from temples to lodges. Right? They really used to be called Masonic temples, right? And that was the nomenclature. And now we've, in even Masonic language, have backtracked a little bit on that from what I've seen.
I mean, my building still says temple on it, and people forget that.
I think that a long time ago, I actually was trying to look into that because I wanted to see if there was some correlation to that. Because the idea is right that once the Morgan expose happened and all of these kind of things, we look weird to the outside world, and so they try to normalize a lot of stuff by the injection of other types of practices and community involvement and things to, take away this kind of, we never were nefarious.
Thanks, Baltimore Convention.
Yeah, I mean, it just looks that way, right? So with that, I was looking through the different texts, my Grand Lodge proceedings, going back to 1840 something, when we had a second Grand Lodge form after the Morgan affair. And there's no mention of any in any of those minutes calling anything a temple. Everything is a lodge. And so then I actually got into a conversation with our local, big-time history guy, right, Alex Powers, who loves Masonic history, does his podcast. And I asked him the same thing, or he asked me, And I said, well, I did some research on it. Maybe you can pick it up, because I couldn't find anything. And I think he did find evidence that, indeed, the nomenclature changes from temple to lodge, and maybe that was to normalize things. And not to, I don't want to get off on this too much here, but maybe you guys can correlate or corroborate this kind of feeling. I was recently doing a presentation on esoterics a couple weeks ago. I think it was for St. John's Lodge in Washington. And one of the questions was, they said, Robert, why do you think more guys don't just out and say that they're thinking about these kinds of topics in the lodge? And my honest response was that I feel like people are embarrassed.
Yeah.
Like they're afraid that people will look at them like they're a weirdo or whatever the case is. And I had to say, like, yeah, I mean, I have this really weird fear, right, where I don't let people know what kind of music I listen to.
Mhm.
Like I'll get judged.
Oh, I can judge a man by his books
thing,
he reads. Right. Exactly.
That's right. Yeah. And so what does that say about you? And how does that make you like any less of a person?
I'm totally that dude who like plays a game out of like looking at people's bumper stickers and like stickers on the back of their car down the highway and try to like build a profile. Like, what is this person? What do they do in their spare time? Right. But to your point, I mean, that's a really good point, because let's rewind a bit. Like some of the topics that aren't as controversial today, but were very controversial in the 80s when you had the, Satanism, right? You had rock bands that when you played the music backwards, they had hidden messages and all this. Like there was actual like fear of like suburban moms that their kids were going to be devil worshippers, and they just lumped in everything. And you've seen all these tracks about like Dungeons and Dragons and Freemasonry, and they just lumped it all
heavy
together.
metal. Yeah.
But it also included things like the Kabbalah, like the tarot, like astrology, things that, are on a different path and can have a dark path to it, but are not in themselves very, very dangerous. And so that's where I think, to your point, we're still living the scars of, the late 70s, early 80s, and what's taboo about some of these topics. Robert?
No, I was just pointing at you like you hit it. Yeah, living in the scars is a great way to put that. It's just really unfortunate, right? Like, because in particular you have young guys, and by young guys, I don't, it doesn't always have to be young guys, right? But in particular, we do live in a generation where the church is losing people, right? People say they're spiritual, but they don't go to a church and don't practice a religion. However, they practice a living philosophy and these kinds of things. And Freemasonry, I think, has a lot to offer those kinds of individuals. And they read some of the things that a lot of people, maybe there's just a correlation. You're the data guy, right? Think about those profiles. The profile of somebody who is technologically savvy, who is online putting content out, who also might believe in these things, right? And so those are the things that people are accessing. When they find them, they go, oh man, maybe Masonry's for me. And we probably think, yeah, it is. But when those people come to a lodge and they don't experience that, huge problem, right? There's just nothing there for them. And then where do they turn? And, this is where I think so much fulfillment comes in with things like refracted light, with podcasts, but we have to get to a point where this is an acceptable thing. I had a DEO when I was a DDGM. My first DEO was a guy named Dan Gentry, and he said to a full room at a district meeting, he said, I didn't okay this comment, but he just laid it out because he is obnoxiously amazing, and he just said, listen, you have to offer this stuff, because if you don't, you're just telling them that you don't give a crap, right? And I had a DDGM at a meeting say to another DDGM who said, I don't get this esoteric stuff. And this other guy says to him, well, you better start getting it, because that's what these guys are looking for. And it's not that everybody is, but there's the substantial amount of guys out there are looking for some of it.
Yeah, and so to that point, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to ask Joe to give his feedback. I did bring that up once a couple of years ago. I was after my year in the East, but maybe 5 years ago or so, and I had actually spoken at a district-wide leadership conference that we had, and I talked to the Grand Provost, who's kind of in charge of education, and I said, hey, we've got to offer up something a little bit more of the, at least, if nothing else, not the crazy secret squirrel stuff, but at least the philosophical sort. And had a great discussion with the 10 or so brothers that were there talking about Masonic education, going, well, we don't want to go overboard. I said, guys, like, peace. Like, I'm not saying go overboard. I'm just saying a little bit of balance, because we have all ritual and leadership and exoteric at best type of Freemasonry, and we have zero of the, what does this all mean? Why are we here? Like, what did you come here to do? Like, the basics of Freemasonry. So, Joe, how do we make it more accessible?
Yeah, well, I think that's, well, being a member of the same grand jurisdiction that you are, I completely agree. I remember when I first took the correspondence courses that we have, which is considered your...
I was excited for them.
Yeah, me too. And it's considered a good chunk of education, right? You do them on your own. They're your traditional correspondence course. But yeah, I got history. I got, 50 questions about George Washington. I got some ritual questions and some law questions. And I was like, exactly to your point, I finished all of them. And I was like, there was not a single question about what any of this means. And I think that kind of sums up the problem, is that we've become an organization, for the most part, with few exceptions, that goes through the motions but doesn't know or doesn't care about what the meaning is behind those motions. And I think that's the problem with the way people think about esotericism today, right? If you were to tell your average Christian that Jesus was esoteric and everything he told you that really meant anything was in parable, they'd look at you funny. They're like, no, Jesus is not esoteric, so yeah, you're making a face. But it's the same thing, right? It was, it's that whole analogy of, there's certain things that get said in very plain language, and there's certain things that get said in parable, and it's your job as an initiate, going all the way back to Jason's point. If you actually paid attention through your initiation, you'll start to pick up what some of those things are. And those are the things that are supposed to make you a better husband and a better father and a better employee and a better citizen, and, all the other, cool things that we say we do.
Mm-hmm. So, Jason, do you think that that diving deep into those kind of aspects are what at least contribute to taking good men and making them better?
I do. Because I've seen the way folks who take esoteric texts literally treat people, and not often very nice. So by searching for the deeper meaning and by trying to get to know the Creator on a personal level through a lot of esoteric self reflection and introspection, I think is a perfect way to help yourself become your best self, at least while you're on this earth.
Yeah, so I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I started going down kind of the esoteric and philosophical path because of Masonry. As I started researching and reading more, thank goodness we're born in the information age where everything's just a Google search away now. And the adage has been said about some of the young guys joining Masonry are going to know more than some of the past masters of that lodge, because they're coming in having read everything, and now they're going to be at such a higher tier. The bar has been set much higher for them coming in, at least the expectations of the craft. And so I've told the story before on TMR, as I started reading things, I was just soaking it all in as a young Master Mason. And then I try to share it with, past masters of the lodge, and it just, I'd either get blank stares or I'd get, well, I think so-and-so might know something about that. And so that turned me off a little bit right away, because I was like, okay, great. At best, I don't have anyone I can talk to about it. and at worst, I'm going down the wrong path. But you know, me not giving up, I kept reading, kept researching, and I'm not gonna lie, it actually helped me be a better Christian personally, because I was now going back and doing more, exegesis of some of the Bible verses that we use in Lodge. I was like, what does this mean? And I have a different perspective on it. And I'd start, well, now let me go back to the original Greek or Hebrew. And then now you're like, oh, crap, that's not what the translation says. And I know Joe can attest to that too, right?
Yeah, no, you absolutely hit that on the head. And I think, whatever your religion is, good exegesis is the right thing to do across the board. But you said something that is so profound that I picked up on when you talked about guys coming in and are the readers and that know more than people that have been Masons for 20 years about their own fraternity.
Isn't that embarrassing, though?
It is, but I think there's a hidden detriment there that we're living, right, with the numbers dropping, is that the bar gets set so high. And you go back to the example that Robert was talking about, where you have guys coming in and they think Masonry is for them because from what they've researched and what they've learned from good sources, not from weird, crappy sources, that there is a system of philosophy that they can tie to and incorporate into their own being. Then they go to a really bad meeting, and it just deflates them even more so, right? Because the bar has been set so high, that crash is really hard when it comes down. And they go to a couple of meetings and they're like, this is garbage, and then they never come back again. So it's like this self-fulfilling prophecy of the scars that we're trying to hide and heal. So
yeah, I think also it has to be said that to return to this kind of idea you said a minute ago, sorry, Jason, you were talking about how you were applying these lessons, and that is the esoteric, right? I mean, a lot of the books people will pick up and they read, and they're 500 long, and by the time you finish them, you're like, I don't know what the hell this guy even, or this person even in the text. It's just why, and it's in a vernacular that nobody understands besides the people who are in those things, who have had similar revelations or read certain things and have been practicing for years. So to clear this up, right? Esoteric is internal work. To be a Mason is to make a good man better. And we say in the Christ that we are applying these work tools. It was said on the history trend to divest our hearts and minds of the vices and superfluities of life, to thereby fitting ourselves for the spiritual building. Not, this is internal work. And that internal work relates directly to making a good man esoteric work. So just laying that out there, but also I have to give credit. Patrick Day wrote a great article called "The Problem with Esoteric Masonry," I think it's called. But
yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
He a really good argument for why esoteric Masonry doesn't work sometimes, and why it does work, and it relates, of course, to throwing out the baloney, and being and what we as esotericists have to deal with a lot of the time is being accessible, and not just coming into Lodge and off stuff, because just in that same way, you or anybody else who's interested in these things Lodge and then love it if this stuff happens, well, or how we get turned off by just minutes. There are people who join a fraternity for a more social experience, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I will say that you have to at least have a passive interest in some of this stuff to really derive all the value you can. But to those members who are totally into nothing, they're not really into that stuff, and if they go to an esoteric lodge, totally turn them off, and they might just think like, this is the most crazy, weird garbage ever. And so it should be noted that if you're going to present these kinds of topics, to do them responsibly. I wouldn't recommend telling somebody to go reading Blavatsky or something, right? Like a lot of that stuff is just I'll be honest. I mean, I think a lot of that stuff is not great, and I think it can be dangerous to lead somebody down some paths that are kind of not spurious. What's the word I'm looking for? But yeah.
Yeah. So just to build on that, yeah, just to build on that, because I think it's important. Because in his paper and what you were trying to highlight is that if you're excited about the hidden side, right, the philosophies and esoteric side of Masonry, and you want to give a presentation, you just can't start diving in, like talking about Keter and Chakma and Bina, and just start like diving deep without setting the stage, right? This is just like basic education, right? You can't just jump to calculus for a first grader. You've really got to start laying some foundational things up, and maybe make it a 10-part series, maybe make it something that you do as a study club. But you're excited about it. You've been reading a lot more than anyone has, and you're trying to distill these hours of your life that you've spent digging deep, and now you're trying to put it into either a presentation or heck, even a hallway conversation. Hey, guess this cool thing I just found. And you're trying to distill all this into like one sentence, and people are going to be like, that means nothing to me, and that's part of the danger of going on that, because then you look like a crazy guy who's shouting Bible verses from the street corner, right? So you don't want to be the guy who's like, the world is ending, the end is near. However, so that's kind of step one, is make sure you know enough about what you're talking about so that you're not just throwing out terms that aren't, they're very loosely defined and don't can lead them astray. Also, to the point in the paper, which was bring it back to Freemasonry. Like if you start talking about Kabbalah, like come on, you gotta like set some frame of reference back to why we're in Lodge talking about this, because otherwise, you're way off path. I see.
We all know Most Worshipful Brother Sean Bradshaw, who we would all definitely consider an esotericist, right? Past Grand Master of North Carolina. Great brother. But what does he say every time somebody starts getting sideways with stuff? Keep it in the ritual. He's like, you could talk about whatever you want and any systems of philosophy that you choose. Just keep it in the ritual. And I think that's another point that paper that was in Esoteric Mason talks about, is that exactly to your point, people go all the way to calculus, and just lose people along the way. And another thing that paper touched on, which I found most interesting, is that Masons consider esoteric Masons to be aloof and snobby and pretentious, and many of us are. I will say that. But it's exactly as you stated it. Yeah, no, you totally are. It's exactly how you stated it, John, where you have to get people as excited on the 100 hours you spent reading in a 30-minute time period, and you have to slowly work them into it and then show them the reasons why you got excited about it in the first place. But I think if you keep it within the framework of the ritual within the craft, you're coming at it from a much more informed place, and you're coming at it from a place where you'll make some connections with someone, whether they're a social club Mason or a charitable Mason or a Green Bee Mason, or even, the dreaded esotericist.
John, you're muted.
Oh, there.
I was waiting for you.
Yeah, hi.
Actually, I was muted, and I just did the dun 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 dramatic music.
Right.
And was wondering why you all were just staring at me awkwardly.
He's moving his lips. John's moving his lips. What are they doing?
It's esoteric. You wouldn't understand.
It's hidden.
What pretentious.
So, Robert, you did use the word occult earlier. What's the difference between occult and esoteric for the listeners?
Man, so that's a really difficult question. I mean, it's probably not so different, really. I think a lot of people are into esoteric stuff, right? I call Paul Foster Case has a great terminology he used at one point. He called people spiritual tramps, and people who I would describe as today as people who what I would call maybe like pop culture esotericists, people who know a lot of tidbits and nuggets, but are probably not. And there's nothing wrong with this. It's like a passive interest, and they might be experts, but there's a difference between reading a great book and then practicing an art. Okay, so I would say every occultist is an esotericist, but not every esotericist is an occultist. And I would probably say, like, the reason why I would consider an occultist is probably somebody who whips out a tarot deck once a week or more, or does a ritual once a week or more. I would say that because occult just means hidden, there you go. Because it just means hidden, there's definitely things that you do as a practitioner of some religious art that gives you a sense of connection, and that you've done something in a practical, like in like a mystical, or I don't want to say divinatory, but in a way that might conjure some sort or invoke some sort of yeah, right. So you take communion. I think communion is essentially a cult, right? I mean, like, it is a real practice, and the people who do that, some people take communion many times, right? It's a devout practice, but then you can go, around the world and see occult practices from, I think, what was the first, almost probably the Western world's pop culture reference to the art of self-flagellation. What is it called when they're whipping
like
themselves,
Opus
right?
Dei,
Like,
the flagellation.
Self-flagellation.
Yeah, like Opus Dei. Yeah.
What about
crucifixion
in the Philippines? Like
actual, no kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So these are all occult practices. So I would say anybody, there's probably not too much of a difference unless you don't have a practice, right? Like, if you don't have a practice, then maybe it's not an occult, but or an occultist, I would say. Maybe the difference is practice, but really, if you're being completely honest, in the 21st century, where words have changed meaning over years, I mean, they're kind of synonymous, kind of.
Yeah, I will also say too, one of my pet peeves. We talked about this as we were dabbling into like what is esotericism in earlier episodes of TMR, but it is not necessarily what does this symbol mean to me, right? That is not esoteric. That's interpretive. That is contemplative, but it is not esoteric in itself. It is also not, another huge pet peeve of me, finding correspondences that really aren't there. So because, we have the color green in the ritual, that also means it responds to green beans. And then green beans is a Masonic esoteric symbol. And you're like, no. Okay, let's try this again. Because making connections
Can't believe
aren't
you
there.
just did that.
Someone's going to take that clip and run that for the next 50 years. But you see my point, that
there won't be any Masons around in 50 years. You're
true.
okay.
I'm safe. but that's the point, is that is all well and good to determine, to be introspective, reflective, think about what the symbols of Freemasonry mean to you, and interpret them in modern day context, for example. But that is not what the authors of the ritual meant, 300 years ago when they wrote it. Okay, so you have to be very clear about that, because again, this is where, to Jason's point, like where history and the ritual and the philosophy marry up. Because, as we've said before many, many times, Freemasonry is a syncretic philosophy. It takes a little bit of here, a little bit of there, mushes them together. And if you're not careful about how you find those sources aligning, like you can be way off the path. And so just be careful about that when you're looking at esotericism and Freemasonry.
Somebody said something in the chat a few minutes ago about there's definitely a reason you don't cast pearls before swine. And I think that's an interesting quote, right? But at the same time, that same mentality is why we have achieved such notoriety among people who hate the fraternity, because we have secrets, right? And it's not really. I would have to say that the reason why you don't cast pearls before swine is not that they might learn something, right? Because everything is experiential in terms of the way we operate. So,
Right.
are there pearls to even be cast? Maybe this fraternity has aligned you with other organizations that have pearls to be cast, but within
Thank you.
Freemasonry,
So that's the
is
other
there?
point. When preparing for the show, I definitely wanted you to rehash, Robert, your thought about Freemasonry being the outer door or the outer porch.
Sure, yeah. I mean, Freemasonry has been called the Masonic waiting room, so the Blue Lodge waiting room, right? When you do fraternity, maybe you're into this kind of thing, and by the time you wait around for a number of years, you go through the chairs. I mean, I was probably I was probably a senior warden in my lodge, so 6 years in my lodge before I met anybody else, before I even knew anybody else in my lodge had any kind of inclination toward anything on the realm of philosophy. And so through the found other groups, others who were into some. I don't know. You guys familiar with that bumper sticker, right? Keeping it weird. Just things like that others would consider, weird, right? But what's crazier than crazy to me, John, is that a lot of these other organizations that kind of spur off of Freemasonry are they're started by Freemasonry, 1800s,
Right,
even late
exactly.
1700s, and so you've got these administrative heads in Masonry who sometimes poop all over all over esoteric Masonry, but yet are members of things like Red Cross of Constantine, or are members of of organizations like Martinist orders, or go to Masonic Week and there's
SRICF,
some
Right.
totally
AMD,
right, and
yeah.
so that just baffles my mind, right? They can poop all over it in one way, but they pay dues to an organization that were founded on these very ideals later,
Yeah, I
to
never
which other
understood that.
organizations, SRICF starts, and the people who want to be complete practitioners, essentially, of what the SRICF is supposed to be talking about, create the Golden Dawn. Well, what's going on here?
It's like we're on the 7th reboot of the Matrix, right? So we're just, okay, that didn't work. Let's create another order. That standard didn't work. Let's create a 10th standard. Now we have 11 standards. So
And I've always I've heard Robert say that before about how Blue Lodge is the waiting room, and the older and more experienced I become as a Freemason, the more I actually start to disagree with that. I think there's so much. I agree with everything that Robert said, talking about how you have groups of brothers that I guess get disenfranchised or want to impart another lesson or have their own set of parables, let's call them, because people like that word, and start something else. But I think if you took the craft lodge ritual for what it is and what it's meant to do, and going all the way back to the beginning of this talk about how Jason said that the most esoteric parts of it are the initiatic experience, and if we remembered that as we were going through it ourselves or imparting that initiatic experience upon another person, we would start to see that there's so much there in the craft lodge and the lessons that are meant to be there that is a lifetime's worth of learning without having to join all those other things that I have dues cards for in my wallet. That's really the
if
truth.
done
That's
correctly.
totally.
Right.
Totally.
If done correctly.
And I got to agree with Joe. I mean, as I've gotten older, I've experienced the same thing. Greg Kaminsky, I always reference this, but I don't know that I ever attribute it to Greg, but when I would complain about the craft and tell him it feels like a waiting room, and Greg told me, sometimes you just have to be okay with Masonry the way it is, Robert. And that's when I realized, like, okay, individual path Masonry, people are going to find what they want to find. And, then we had books come out, right? Like guys like Andy Hammer and the Craft Driven Lodge.
Yeah, I mean, we could have the
these
TO
kind of books.
comparison. Right.
right? Those books really advocate for the idea that everything you need is within the craft lodge if done properly and understood that way.
Yeah, so I liken that to religious practice as well, because, I'm just going to take it from the Christian context that I have, right? That the church is open to anybody, but there are some people that are like mega for Jesus, and there's some that are just dabbling, right? And you have to appeal to that whole spectrum, right? And there's some people that you need to have the Bible verses up on the screen and walk through it, and there's some people that just know it by memory. And then there's some people that are living it, breathing it, practicing it, having their own contemplative practices, doing, Divina Lectica and all that. Like they are really into applying the philosophic principles that have been outlined and expanded upon by St. Thomas Aquinas and everyone else, right? So you can see where there's this whole spectrum of, you need to appeal to the person who walked in the door for the first day and the mega religious person and everywhere in between. And so, to your point, that's kind of where Freemasonry is, even at its best and worst, unfortunately, right? You have your TO lodges that try to create an atmosphere that is observant, and then you have your lodges that are very relaxed and that are much more fraternal and not much educational, and realize that they're the same from a Masonic pedigree, but have different, they're satisfying the needs of that congregation. I know I'd get Joe riled up on that one.
I made a little face. It wasn't bad. I'm not riled up. I am not riled up at all. I am kerfuffled, but I want to agree with you, and it's interesting when having grown up Roman Catholic, like ethnic Roman Catholic, like I was an altar boy during the week before school Roman Catholic, and I would see those same blue-haired old ladies every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday coming into church to get communion, during the week, to not practicing my faith, to going to a non-denominational church and trying some other ones out, but I actually get the sense that it's using the Christian analogy. Churches say they want to do that, they want to appeal to everyone, but they don't. They have a niche audience and market that they want to proffer to, right? Just in my area alone of Virginia, there's so many different denominations of churches that all have their own unique flavor and cater to a specific type of person. But on paper, of course, they want to appeal to the masses. And I think that, unfortunately, is one of our largest issues, is that we try to appeal to so many people just to get numbers up. We have no idea what the hell our identity is anymore.
Amen. Amen to that.
And that's just our biggest issue, that we have no identity anymore. We try to be too many things to too many different people.
There's no value proposition because we can't nail down what we will do and what we won't do.
Exactly. Yeah. We haven't made a choice of what are we. Are we a philosophical school that tries to take our morality plays and take good men and make them better, or are we a social club? With that rhetorical question,
well,
go ahead.
The data, real quick though, John. When we asked things in the past, I've run surveys, and so have you. Astounded. Maybe I think it was a poor choice on my part to give up 4, A, B, C, D in a multiple choice question. What are you looking for in Freemasonry? Right, ritual, social club,
right.
Masonic education and charity, because it came back 25% on each. So yeah. And what leads that, right? Is it because we have no identity that leads that kind of a number? Or is it, the kind of people who are coming and just expect those 4 things?
Mm-hmm. So now we're at the final question part of the evening. The final question for each of you to consider is, what do you hope for the future of esoteric Freemasonry? Right? We're all, esoteric apologetics. And now we have to say, okay, we're here, we're esoteric, we're not gonna back down from that. What do we hope for now for the future of esoteric Freemasonry? And I'm gonna switch over to Joe for his final question.
Man, cool. Well, gents, thank you so much for having me on. It's really serendipitous that I was on tonight, considering a lot of us will be at Esotericon 2021 on Saturday.
Yay!
Yay! Where we talk about esoteric stuff. But to answer your question,
Wow.
I'm sorry, me and Robert's wives are in the family room doing wife things. But to answer your question, what I hope...
As you do.
Indeed. What I hope to happen more in esoteric Freemasonry is, I think, exactly what is happening right now. It's we're meeting, because of we live in the information age, we're meeting brothers and friends across the world that we never would have been able to meet before, and we're sharing experiences, and we're sharing ideas about how we think the world should work with people that we can latch onto. So, I mean, for Freemasonry, if Freemasonry doesn't figure out what the hell it wants to be when it grows up, there's no hope for it. But I think that, I think that for the esoteric Mason, I think there's a lot of hope for the future, because we're becoming closer as a niche group, and I think that's just going to continue moving forward in time.
Awesome, thanks. Let's head over to Robert, who's just in the next room from you. Robert, what is your hope for the future of esoteric Freemasonry?
I just hope that more people who join craft are accepted, right, for what they do and what they're interested in. I think it breeds a wonderful ground for comparative studies and understanding as we operate in a Masonic lodge, which a great deal of the way we can, let's say, a business meeting is through listening and understanding and reiteration and having good dialogue. And to be able to have true dialogue and to be able to have a quote unquote great, I don't want to say safe space, but to have a place where you can gather with like-minded individuals who would be supportive of your interests and supportive of your spiritual life, it becomes necessary to normalize these other kinds of practices and belief structures and interests, because you can't say that you respect those things, then truly it's not an organization that's open to just anyone. It's kind of like we look at the idea of it's always attributed to like the Dalai Lama or something, many paths to a single center. But it doesn't always feel like certain paths get to sit at the big kids' table of respect. And Chad Kopensky mentioned in the chat that what's what. And I think, John, you did answer that. How do you know what's baloney and what isn't, and that kind of stuff. But I think taking those weird kind of elements and throwing them out, not the baby with the bathwater, right? But truly just trying to understand our brothers and that's what I hope the future of esoteric Masonry has. As we've pointed out, I think rather well and reiterated throughout the episode, Freemasonry is completely esoteric, and under every aspect of it, and drawing it always back to the ritual is super important. Some of the work that we've done on this is the Masonic Legacy Society, which involves exactly the idea of taking bits of ritual and pulling that string and seeing what it is interpretive to you, right? So what John talked about, that it was a little bit of a pet peeve to him, perhaps not in the same way, how it relates Masonically and what it teaches you. But yeah, that's what I hope for the future. Greater understanding and diversity, and people being able to be open about it without fear of saying, oh, well, that's not the Abrahamic God, you can scoot. I just don't think that's a good way to be in Masonry. It's just not who we are. Anyway, go. I hope to see a lot of Esotericon virtually and see the names and chats and all that cool stuff. And Sunday night, 9:30, Whence Came You? Masonic Podcast. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Very, very cool. All right, heading over to Jason. What do you hope for the future of esoteric Freemasonry?
I would hope for a destigmatization of esoteric studies and esoteric philosophies. There's still very much a stigma and almost a visceral reaction against esoteric studies on the part of some brothers in Freemasonry. I'm like, you are a member of the modern like mystery school,
Mm-hmm.
and you're like, oh, there's no esoterics in Freemasonry. Get that stuff out. It's just a lazy way to approach philosophy. So I'd like to see less of a stigma and more openness to those, you know, choosing the path of esoteric study and exegesis. And you know, it's not for everybody, and it shouldn't be everybody, because if it was for everybody, it'd be exoteric.
There you go.
See you all Saturday. Looking forward to it.
Yay. Okay, so let's see. Head over to me. Yeah, just to build off of everything everyone said, the interesting part of this to me is treat the deep philosophic and religious connotations of Masonry as think of it like college courses, right? You go to college, you can have your own path, and you can study like different aspects. Some people are great ritualists. Some people are great at knowing the leadership things, and yet we don't see it at an equal level where it's very clear what the path is of how to dive deeper into these things. Because I've been asked many times, like, where do I start? Right? If I know that I'm interested in it, and I'm already a Master Mason, I'm already through the veil, like, where do I start? And then there's a whole bunch of conversations that go from there. What are you interested in? What's your background? And I can kind of help guide you there. And so if it were just at equal footing to say, if you really want to be service oriented, here are some of the charities that our lodge does. Here are some of the external community facing things our lodge does. If you are, philosophically minded, if you are, a religious, thinker, like, here are some other things to think about too. And they should be at equal paths, because, like, I'll be perfectly honest, it's what I wanted when I joined Freemasonry, because I didn't know it existed, and I already talked about how hard it was to get started. And so if someone were to say the day after my raising, here's all the things of Freemasonry, one of them being these really cool rabbit holes you can go down, just take this red pill, and I'll show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Sign me up. Like, I'm there. So that's what I hope for the future of esoteric Freemasonry, is that we're not competing, right? We're not competing for the fraternity. We're just having yet another door that's visible, accessible, and ready for the next generation to walk through. So with that, I want to thank you all very much for watching. See you next week, and keep searching for more light. Have a good night.